Everything you deny about yourself becomes the invisible saboteur of your relationships. Carl Jung said this in a different way, but this is the brutal truth that most people never want to face. Right now, as you're watching this, there's a part of you that you've been hiding, rejecting, pushing away. And that exact part is the reason why your love life keeps following the same destructive patterns. Over and over again. Comment below where you're watching from and tell me honestly. Have you ever noticed that you keep attracting the same type of person? Or you keep making the same mistakes in relationships? Even when you swear you've learned your lesson, because what I'm about to share with you will explain exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how to break free from it. You know that feeling when you're in a relationship and suddenly something inside you just starts destroying everything good, or when you meet someone amazing and instead of feeling happy, you feel terrified, or when you find yourself being attracted to people who clearly aren't good for you, but you can't help it. That's not coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's your shadow working behind the scenes, sabotaging your chances at real love. Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychologist who changed how we understand the human mind, discovered something that most people spend their entire lives running from. He found that we all have what he called a shadow, the part of ourselves that we've decided is unacceptable, shameful, or wrong. And here's the thing that will blow your mind. Everything we reject about ourselves doesn't just disappear. It goes underground and starts controlling our lives from the shadows. If you've ever wondered why you always choose people who end up hurting you, drop a heart in the comments. If you've ever sabotaged a good relationship without really understanding why, drop a heart. If you've ever felt like there's some invisible force working against your happiness in love, you're not alone. And you're not crazy. You're just human, dealing with one of the most powerful and least understood forces in psychology. Think about your last relationship that ended badly. Really think about it. Was there a moment when things were going well, really well, and then suddenly everything started falling apart? Maybe you started picking fights about nothing. Maybe you became suspicious for no real reason. Maybe you pulled away just when things were getting serious. Maybe you chose someone who was emotionally unavailable from the start, and you convinced yourself you could change them. Most people blame these patterns on external factors. They say it's because they have bad luck with love, or because all the good ones are taken, or because people today don't know how to commit. But Jung discovered something much deeper and much more empowering. He found that our relationship patterns are mirrors of our internal relationship with ourselves. The shadow isn't just some abstract psychological concept. It's the collection of every quality, emotion, desire, and aspect of yourself that you learned to hide because somewhere along the way, someone or something taught you that these parts were unacceptable. Maybe you learned that anger was bad, so you stuffed it down. Maybe you learned that neediness was pathetic, so you became hyper-independent. Maybe you learned that vulnerability was weakness, so you built walls. But here's where it gets really interesting and really scary. Jung discovered that we don't just hide these rejected parts from others. We project them. We see them everywhere except in ourselves. The qualities that trigger us most in other people are usually the exact qualities we've rejected in ourselves. The behaviors that make us want to run away from relationships are often the behaviors we're terrified of acknowledging in ourselves. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. What quality in a partner makes you want to end things immediately? What behavior makes your skin crawl? What type of neediness or emotional expression makes you want to run for the hills? Write it down mentally, because that quality you just thought of is probably living in your shadow, and it's been sabotaging your relationships in ways you never realized. This isn't about blame or shame. This is about freedom, because once you understand how your shadow operates in your love life, you can start making conscious choices instead of being unconsciously controlled by these hidden patterns. You can start attracting and maintaining the kind of love you actually want instead of the kind of drama your shadow thinks you deserve. Jung believed that the goal isn't to eliminate the shadow. That's impossible and would actually make you less human. The goal is integration. The goal is to bring these hidden parts into consciousness so they stop controlling you from the darkness. When you can own your jealousy, it stops owning you. When you can acknowledge your neediness, it stops sabotaging your connections. When you can accept your anger, it stops destroying your peace. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 7 specific ways your shadow sabotages your relationships. These aren't just theories. These are real patterns that show up in real relationships every single day. And for each one, I'm going to give you practical ways to recognize it and start working with it instead of against it. If you're ready to stop being controlled by the parts of yourself you've been running from, if you're ready to understand why your love life has been following the same painful patterns, and if you're ready to create relationships based on consciousness instead of unconscious compulsion, then stay with me. This might be the most important thing you learn about love this year. The first way your shadow sabotages your relationships is through unconscious jealousy. And this one runs so deep that most people never realize it's happening. Jung discovered that jealousy isn't really about the other person or even about your partner. It's about the parts of yourself that you've projected onto others, and then become terrified of losing. Here's how it works. Let's say deep down you believe you're not interesting enough, not attractive enough, not successful enough. Instead of facing these insecurities directly, your shadow projects them outward. Suddenly, every person your partner talks to becomes a threat because they represent everything you believe you're not. That colleague who's funnier than you, that friend who's more successful, that ex who seems to have it all together. Your jealousy isn't really about them. It's about the war going on inside you between who you are and who you think you should be. The really cruel part is that this kind of shadow jealousy becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you're constantly suspicious, constantly checking up, constantly looking for evidence that you're not enough, you create exactly the dynamic that pushes people away. Your partner starts feeling suffocated, starts needing space, starts pulling back, and then your shadow whispers, "See, I told you they were going to leave you for someone better." I want you to pay attention to your jealousy this week. Not to judge it, not to fight it, but to get curious about it. When that jealous feeling comes up, ask yourself, what quality in this other person am I afraid I don't have? What am I projecting onto them that I'm refusing to see in myself? Share in the comments what you discover, because this kind of honest self-reflection is how real change begins. The second way your shadow sabotages love is by creating an unconscious attraction to people who reject you. This one is probably the most painful to recognize because it explains why you keep choosing people who are emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, or just not that into you. Jung would say that we're attracted to people who mirror our relationship with our own rejected parts. If you've learned to reject your own neediness, you will be magnetically drawn to people who are distant and unavailable because they reflect your own internal rejection of vulnerability. If you've learned to reject your own emotional intensity, you will find yourself chasing people who are cold and detached because they represent the emotional numbness you've imposed on yourself. Here's the brutal truth that no one wants to hear. The people who reject you are showing you exactly how you reject yourself. The person who won't commit to you is reflecting your inability to commit to accepting all parts of yourself. The person who keeps you at arm's length is mirroring how you keep your own emotional needs at arm's length. I know this is hard to hear. especially if you're currently stuck in one of these patterns. But think about it honestly. When someone is genuinely interested in you, genuinely available, genuinely wanting to build something real, how do you feel? Do you feel excited and grateful? Or do you feel bored and maybe even a little repulsed? Do you find yourself looking for problems with them, reasons why it won't work, ways to convince yourself they're not right for you? This is your shadow talking. It's saying, if they want me, there must be something wrong with them, because I know what's wrong with me. It's the voice that whispers, real love is supposed to be hard. Real love is supposed to hurt. Real love is something you have to chase and earn and prove yourself worthy of. But Jung discovered something revolutionary about this pattern. He found that when we start to integrate our shadow, when we start to accept the parts of ourselves we've been rejecting, we naturally start attracting people who accept us too. We stop being drawn to people who treat us the way we treat ourselves, and start being attracted to people who love us the way we're learning to love ourselves. Take notes this week about the type of person you're consistently drawn to. Are they available or unavailable? Do they pursue you, or do you always have to chase them? Do they make you feel safe and valued, or do they make you feel like you have to prove your worth? And then ask yourself the really hard question. How is this person reflecting my relationship with myself? The third way your shadow sabotages relationships is through emotional sabotage right at the moment when intimacy becomes real. This is when everything is going well. You're getting close. You're starting to care. And suddenly some part of you just starts destroying everything. You pick fights about nothing. You become critical about things that never bothered you before. You create drama where none existed. Jung understood this as the shadow's desperate attempt to maintain control. Getting close to someone means being seen, really seen, including the parts you've spent years hiding. Your shadow would rather destroy the relationship than risk being discovered. It would rather be alone than be rejected for who you really are. The timing of this sabotage is everything. It doesn't happen when things are casual or surface level. It happens right when things get real, right when they start talking about the future, right when you realize you actually care about this person, right when the possibility of real love becomes real and therefore real scary. Maybe you start picking fights about their friends, their family, their career choices. Maybe you become hypercritical about the way they eat, the way they drive, the way they laugh. Maybe you suddenly remember why your ex was so much better, or why being single was so much easier. These aren't real problems. These are shadow problems. These are your rejected parts trying to create distance before intimacy can threaten their hiding places. The really insidious part is that this kind of sabotage feels so justified in the moment. Your shadow is incredibly good at finding real flaws and magnifying them into relationship-ending issues. It takes their human imperfections and turns them into evidence that this person isn't right for you, that you should run, that you should protect yourself before they inevitably hurt you. But here's what Jung discovered about integration. When you start to recognize this pattern, when you can catch yourself in the act of sabotage, you can make a different choice. You can ask yourself, am I pulling away because there's a real problem? Or am I pulling away because I'm scared of being seen and accepted for who I really am? If this resonates with you, if you've ever found yourself destroying something good right when it was getting real, share in the comments. Let's normalize this pattern so we can all start healing it together. The fourth way your shadow sabotages relationships is through excessive criticism of your partner. And this one is particularly cruel because it disguises itself as having high standards or wanting the best for them. But Jung discovered that what we criticize most harshly in others is usually what we can't stand about ourselves. When you find yourself constantly nitpicking your partner's habits, their choices, their way of being in the world, your shadow is. Projecting your own self-rejection onto them. That thing that drives you crazy about how they handle money. Look at your own relationship with financial security. That way they communicate that makes you want to scream. Examine how you communicate your own needs. That habit they have that you just can't tolerate. Notice how you treat your own imperfections. The really tragic part is that this criticism creates exactly the dynamic that kills love. No one can maintain genuine affection for someone who constantly makes them feel like they're not good enough. Your partner starts walking on eggshells, starts hiding parts of themselves, starts becoming smaller and smaller to avoid your judgment. And then your shadow looks at this diminished version of them and says, "See, they really aren't good enough for you." Here's a practice that will change everything about how you see criticism in relationships. For the next week, every time you feel the urge to criticize your partner or someone you're dating, pause and ask yourself this question. What is this criticism teaching me about what I reject in myself? What part of me am I seeing in them that I refuse to accept in me? Write down your answer. Don't just think about it. Actually write it down. Because what you'll discover is that your criticism is always a mirror. The partner who's too emotional is reflecting your rejection of your own feelings. The partner who's too needy is reflecting your rejection of your own needs. The partner who's too ambitious is reflecting your rejection of your own drive, or maybe your fear of your own potential. The fifth way your shadow sabotages love is through the fear of abandonment that actually causes abandonment. This is one of the most heartbreaking patterns because it's rooted in real pain, real wounds, real experiences of being left. But your shadow takes that pain and turns it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Here's how it works. You've been hurt before, maybe deeply hurt, maybe repeatedly hurt. So your shadow develops a strategy. Hurt them before they hurt you. Leave before you get left. Create distance before they create distance. Build walls before they build walls. It seems logical. It seems protective. But it's actually destructive. When you constantly brace for abandonment, you can't be present for connection. When you're always looking for signs that they're going to leave, you miss all the signs that they want to stay. When you're preparing for the end from the beginning, you never allow yourself to fully invest in the relationship, which means it never has a real chance to grow into something lasting. Your shadow whispers things like, "They're going to get bored with me eventually, so I get too attached. They're going to find someone better, so I should keep my options open. They're going to hurt me like everyone else has, so I need to protect myself." And every time you listen to these whispers, every time you hold back, every time you create distance to protect yourself, you make it easier for them to actually leave. The cruelest irony is that the very thing you're trying to prevent, you end up creating. Your fear of abandonment becomes the reason for abandonment. Your protection becomes your prison. Your walls become the thing that keeps love out instead of keeping pain out. Jung believed that the only way to heal this pattern is to consciously choose vulnerability, even when it's terrifying. To stay present even when your shadow is screaming at you to run. To love fully even when you can't guarantee the outcome. Because the alternative, living in constant fear of loss, isn't really living at all. How many of you have done this? How many of you have ended something good because you were terrified it would end anyway? Be honest in the comments. There's no shame in this pattern, only the possibility of healing it. The sixth way your shadow sabotages relationships is through unconscious competition instead of collaboration. This shows up when you find yourself in constant power struggles with your partner, always trying to be right, always needing to win, always keeping score of who does more, who sacrifices more, who loves more. Jung understood this as the shadow's attempt to maintain superiority as a defense against feeling inferior. If deep down you believe you're not enough, your shadow will constantly try to prove that you're better than your partner. You will find their weaknesses and use them to make yourself feel stronger. You'll keep track of their mistakes to balance out your own shame. You will turn love into a competition where someone has to lose for you to feel like you're winning. But love isn't a competition. It's a collaboration. Real love is about becoming more together than you could ever be apart. When your shadow turns your partner into a competitor, you lose the opportunity to have them as an ally. When you're focused on being right, you miss the chance to be happy. When you're keeping score, you forget that you're supposed to be on the same team. This pattern shows up in so many ways. Maybe you can't celebrate their successes because they make you feel like a failure. Maybe you can't ask for help because it feels like admitting weakness. Maybe you can't apologize because it feels like losing. Maybe you can't let them be better than you at something because it threatens your entire sense of self. The integration work here is learning to see your partner's strengths as gifts to the relationship instead of threats to your ego. Learning to see their success as something that elevates both of you instead of something that diminishes you. Learning to see love as abundance instead of scarcity. As expansion instead of competition. What triggers competitive feelings in your relationships? What makes you feel like you need to prove you're better, smarter, more capable? Share honestly. Because recognizing these triggers is the first step to transforming them into opportunities for deeper connection instead of reasons for disconnection. The seventh and perhaps most devastating way your shadow sabotages relationships is through emotional unavailability disguised as independence. This is when you convince yourself that needing someone is weakness, that depending on someone is dangerous, that love itself is a threat to your autonomy. Your shadow has learned that connection equals pain, so it builds fortress walls around your heart and calls it strength. Jung understood this as one of the most sophisticated defense mechanisms the shadow creates. It takes your natural need for connection and turns it into shame. It takes your desire for intimacy and makes it feel like a character flaw. It convinces you that real strength means never needing anyone, never being vulnerable, never letting anyone close enough to hurt you. But here's what your shadow doesn't want you to know. True independence isn't the absence of connection. It's the ability to be fully yourself within connection. Real strength isn't never needing anyone. It's being secure enough in yourself to allow interdependence. Genuine autonomy isn't building walls. It's having such a solid sense of self that you can be vulnerable without losing yourself. When your shadow creates emotional unavailability, it doesn't just protect you from potential pain. It protects you from potential joy. It doesn't just keep hurt out. It keeps love out. It doesn't just prevent heartbreak. It prevents heart connection. You end up safe but empty, protected but profoundly alone. This pattern shows up in countless ways. Maybe you date people but never let them get too close. Maybe you have relationships but keep them surface level. Maybe you're physically present but emotionally distant. Maybe you share your body but never your fears, your dreams, your real thoughts about what matters most to you. You might find yourself saying things like, "I don't need anyone. I'm fine on my own. Relationships are too complicated. People always disappoint you anyway." These aren't insights. These are defenses. These aren't truths about love. These are lies your shadow tells you to keep you isolated and therefore safe from the risk of real intimacy. The integration work here is recognizing that emotional availability isn't about losing yourself in someone else. It's about being brave enough to let someone see who you really are. It's about understanding that interdependence is actually a higher form of independence because it requires you to be so secure in yourself that you can share that self with another person. Now, let me give you some practical ways to start recognizing and working with these shadow patterns in your actual relationships. First, start paying attention to your triggers. What behaviors in your partner or potential partners make you want to run, fight, or shut down? These triggers are your shadows, alarm system, and they're telling you exactly where your integration work needs to happen. Second, notice your patterns across relationships. If you keep attracting the same type of person, or if the same problems keep showing up with different people, that's not coincidence. That's your shadow creating familiar dynamics. Look for the common thread, because that thread will lead you directly to the parts of yourself that need attention. Third, practice radical honesty about your motivations. When you're picking a fight, ask yourself, am I upset about this specific thing? Or am I creating distance because intimacy feels scary? When you're being critical, ask yourself, am I trying to help them improve? Or am I trying to feel superior because I feel inferior? When you're pulling away, ask yourself, am I protecting myself from real danger? Or am I protecting myself from real love? Fourth, start small with vulnerability. You don't have to tear down all your walls at once. Pick one small way to be more emotionally available this week. Share one real feeling. Ask for one thing you actually need. Admit one fear or insecurity. Notice what happens in your body when you do this. Notice what stories your shadow tells you about why this is dangerous. Fifth, pay attention to your self-talk about relationships. Jung believed that how we talk to ourselves about love reveals everything about our shadow. Relationship with it. Do you tell yourself that love is hard, that relationships never work out, that you're better off alone? These aren't neutral observations. These are shadow beliefs that create shadow realities. The really beautiful thing about shadow work in relationships is that it doesn't just heal your love life. It heals your relationship with yourself. When you stop projecting your rejected parts onto your partner, you can start accepting those parts in yourself. When you stop running from intimacy, you can start being intimate with your own inner world. When you stop sabotaging connection, you can start connecting with parts of yourself you never knew existed. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate your shadow. That's impossible and would make you less human. The goal is integration, consciousness, choice. It's about recognizing when your shadow is driving the car so you can take the wheel back. It's about understanding your patterns so you can choose different responses. It's about making friends with the parts of yourself you've been at war with. This work takes time, patience, and incredible self-compassion. You're literally rewiring neural pathways that have been running your relationships for years, maybe decades. You're challenging beliefs about love that were formed when you were very young and very vulnerable. You're doing the brave work of loving yourself enough to let someone else love you too. Every time you choose consciousness over compulsion, every time you choose vulnerability over self-protection, every time you choose love over fear, you're doing shadow integration work. And every time you do this work, you're not just changing your own life, you're changing the lives of everyone you'll ever love. Here's what I want you to understand about this shadow work in relationships. This isn't about becoming perfect or fixing all your flaws before you're worthy of love. This is about becoming conscious of the unconscious patterns that have been running your love life so you can start making different choices. It's about recognizing that your shadow isn't your enemy. It's just a part of you that learned to hide a long time ago and now doesn't know how to come out safely. Jung spent his entire career studying this process of integration, and what he discovered will give you hope even in your darkest moments of relationship despair. He found that when we start to accept our rejected parts, when we start to own our projections, When we start to love ourselves enough to risk being loved by someone else, something magical happens. We stop attracting people who mirror our wounds and start attracting people who mirror our healing. Think about the healthiest relationship you know, whether it's your grandparents, your friends, or some couple you admire from afar. What you're seeing isn't to perfect people who never trigger each other. What you're seeing is to people who have done enough inner work to recognize their patterns, own their projections, and choose love over fear even when it's difficult. These couples fight. But they fight about real things instead of shadow things. They get triggered, but they take responsibility for their triggers instead of blaming each other. They have insecurities, but they share them instead of acting them out. They have needs, but they express them directly instead of manipulating to get them met. This is what becomes possible when you start integrating your shadow in relationships. You don't become invulnerable to hurt, but you become less likely to hurt yourself. You don't become immune to relationship challenges, but you become more skilled at working through them consciously instead of reactively. I want to share something with you that Jung discovered about the deepest purpose of romantic relationships. He found that intimate partnerships aren't just about companionship or even love. They're about mutual individuation. They're about becoming more fully yourself through the mirror of another person. They're about having your unconscious patterns reflected back to you so clearly that you can't ignore them anymore. This means that every relationship challenge you've ever faced, every pattern that's ever repeated itself, every way your shadow has ever sabotaged your love life, all of it has been serving a deeper purpose. It's been trying to show you the parts of yourself that need integration, the wounds that need healing, the rejected aspects that need acceptance. Your jealousy is showing you where you need to develop self-worth. Your attraction to unavailable people is showing you where you need to become available to yourself. Your tendency to sabotage intimacy is showing you where you need to become intimate with your own inner world. Your criticism of others is showing you where you need self-compassion. Your fear of abandonment is showing you where you need to learn to stay present with uncertainty. Your need to compete is showing you where you need to collaborate with yourself. Your emotional unavailability is showing you where you need to become available to your own feelings. Every shadow pattern is actually a doorway to deeper self-understanding and ultimately to deeper love. But you have to be willing to walk through the doorway instead of just standing outside complaining about the darkness. Here's what I want you to do starting today. Instead of looking for the perfect person who won't trigger your shadow, start looking for someone who's willing to do their own shadow work alongside you. Instead of trying to find someone who accepts all your rejected parts without you having to accept them yourself, start accepting those parts so you can show up authentically in relationship. Instead of waiting until you're completely healed too, start dating. Start dating as a conscious person who's committed to healing. Instead of expecting your partner to complete you, focus on becoming complete within yourself so you can share that completeness with another person. The most beautiful relationships aren't between two people who never trigger each other's shadows. They're between two people who've learned to see those shadow triggers as invitations to deeper intimacy instead of reasons to create distance. When your partner does something that brings up your jealousy, instead of attacking them or withdrawing, you can say, "I'm feeling insecure right now, and I know that's about me, not you. Can we talk about what I'm afraid of?" When you notice yourself being hypercritical, instead of justifying it, you can say, "I think I'm projecting something onto you that I need to look at in myself." This level of consciousness in relationship is rare, but it's not impossible. It starts with one person, hopefully you, deciding to take responsibility for your shadow instead of letting it run your love life. It starts with someone brave enough to say, "I want to love and be loved consciously, even if it means facing parts of myself I've been running from." Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human life is individuation, becoming who you really are. Underneath all the conditioning, all the defenses, all the rejected parts. And he believed that conscious relationship is one of the most powerful paths to that individuation. When you embrace your shadow, it stops controlling your love life from the darkness. When you own your projections, you stop seeing enemies everywhere and start seeing opportunities for connection. When you integrate your rejected parts, you become someone who can be loved for who you really are instead of who you pretend to be. If this video has opened your eyes to patterns you've been unconscious of, if it's helped you understand why your relationships have followed certain themes, if it's given you hope that you can create something different, then subscribe to this channel for more deep psychological content that will help you understand yourself and your relationships at the deepest levels, and tell me in the comments. Which of these 7 shadow patterns resonated most with you? What did you recognize about yourself that you hadn't seen before? What are you committed to working on in your next relationship or in your current one? Remember, when you embrace your darkness, it stops controlling your light. When you make friends with your shadow, it becomes an ally instead of an enemy. When you love all of yourself, you become someone who can be truly loved by another person. This is the path to conscious love, and it starts with you.